Keep listening for this just in from outdoors, environmental news from the Monterey Bay, only on KZSC, Santa Cruz. KZSC.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The forests around us. We should all be thankful for our forests.
You're tuned into This Just In From Outdoors. Thanks. This Just In From Outdoors is reporting from Washington, D.C. today at the American Geophysical Union Fall Meeting. We'll hear what scientists are learning from the record-setting wildfire season of 2018. And we'll hear from a search and rescue worker from Santa Cruz who was called to assist at the Camp Wildfire in Butte County in November. Plus headlines and more. Stick around.
This Just In From Outdoors.
The UN Climate Summit is underway in Poland this week, and government and business leaders are dealing with the discouraging news that global carbon emissions will jump to a record high in 2018, according to a Global Carbon Project report. The report blames the rise on the growing number of cars and a resurgence in the burning of coal. Business interests are sounding an urgent alarm at the conference, and investment groups managing over $30 trillion in assets demanded the phasing out of all coal burning and steep cuts in carbon emissions. They said that subsidies of fossil fuels must end, and a substantial tax on carbon emissions must be introduced, warning that the global economic losses could rise to more than $20 trillion a year in the long term without rapid action. According to the Guardian newspaper, this permanent economic damage would be almost 4 times the scale of the impact of the 2008 global financial crisis. Spokespersons for the Standard & Poor's rating agency warned leaders that, quote, climate change has already started to alter the functioning of our world, unquote. The U.S. is holding a single event at the UN summit, which promoted the use of so-called clean coal. Observers of the summit expect several dozen nations to commit to end the burning of coal this week, while almost $500 billion in investment in new coal plants is being made by financial institutions in the U.S., China, and Japan since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed.
Negative reaction from conservation groups was swift to a Trump administration proposal to remove federal clean water protections from many smaller streams and wetlands. On Tuesday, the EPA announced a replacement for the Waters of the United States rule. It would lift federal protections from water sources that are seasonal and from wetlands that are not connected by a stream to a larger body of water. Jennifer Collins with the law firm Earth Justice says the proposal ignores the basic science of hydrology.
All water is connected. So whether it's a small stream that only runs part of the year or a wetland that isn't directly connected to a larger body of water, they feed into the larger bodies of water that are the drinking water sources for millions of people across the country.
Acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler called the original Obama-era rule government overreach and said the new rule gives power back to the states, reducing red tape for farmers and other landowners. Collins says the original rule was meant to protect millions of acres of seasonal wildlife habitat, especially in arid western states like California and Nevada, and to keep the water supply free of pesticides and industrial runoff.
This proposal is a prime example of the administration putting polluter profits over people. Really, it's just benefiting polluting industry like oil and gas and other developers.
States do have the option of requiring stricter standards within their borders. The public now has 2 months to comment on the proposed changes at regulations.gov. If the rule is finalized, multiple conservation groups have already vowed to take the fight to the courts.
When you consider the causes of air pollution, you probably think of oil refineries and power plants, not huge modern warehouses full of books, electronics, and other products to be sold online.
We don't see big smokestacks here in our region, right? But what we do see is we see mega warehouses that exceed most times 300,000 square foot.
That's Anthony Victoria of the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice near LA. He says large storage and distribution facilities draw diesel truck traffic into the low-income areas where they're often located. Breathing diesel pollution can cause health problems for people living nearby. So in May, Southern California air quality officials voted to develop rules that hold freight facilities accountable for pollution caused by the truck traffic they generate.
We're in the beginning stages of working with these air regulators to try to create a stronger mandate for companies to really clean up their act. Really forcing them to look at how they're moving these goods through our communities.
He says it's an important step towards improving air quality and reducing global warming pollution.
In the last 17 years, California has been stricken with 17 of the 20 most destructive and deadly wildfires in the state's history. The fire that destroyed the largest area and the fire that killed the most people in California history both occurred within the last year. It's a so-called new abnormal of year-round giant fires that Governor Jerry Brown has dubbed the pattern observed since 2000. But government agencies have more precise tools and ways of cooperating than ever before. And Mark Jackson, who works for the National Weather Service in Oxnard, California, explains how their fire weather services have helped to prevent worse disasters than we're already experiencing. A new program called D-Risk is helping the firefighting agencies to anticipate the worst fires and to get personnel and equipment pre-positioned to jump on a fire as soon as it erupts in any situation that could lead to explosive growth and the loss of life and property. Jackson credits the program with saving the city of Goleta this past July with a repeat of a destructive fire that in 1990 destroyed 427 homes and took one life in less than 2 hours in this Southern California town. Mark Jackson was addressing the American Geophysical Union fall meeting in Washington, D.C. earlier this week.
What we do for our fire agencies, we try to see these events, these Santa Ana events. We're fortunate enough that these Santa Ana events are fairly predictable. And so what we try to do is, and as soon as possible, once we see that signal, we give that message to the fire agencies. So fire started early December, so back on November 30th, we had a special call for all the fire agencies to be able to tell them what we might anticipate. We try to put key words in there as well that get their attention, such as strongest Santa Ana event of the season, strongest Santa Ana event in the last 5 years, anything to get that sense of urgency across for response. And then you look in December, we have webinars, we have partner emails that specifically go to them, give them what we think our confidence levels are in terms of the timing, in terms of the intensity. So as we went on, we have December 2nd, we had issued the red flag warning. We had the fire weather watch. The fire weather watch essentially says our confidence level is about 50%. And so, and then that gets upgraded to a red flag warning. So we upgraded that to a red flag warning, which the red flag warning specifically is a warning for potential for rapid fire spread and erratic fire behavior. It is not predicting fires. It is only indicating that there are extreme fire weather conditions, either imminent or soon to occur. And then we had another call. Fire started on December 4th and Monday night. The Thomas Fire actually started on Monday night. And we also have the incident meteorologist. Almost every office has an incident meteorologist that goes out right to the fire, is right there with the incident command, gives them kind of eye-to-eye support practically around the clock. So that IMET went out on December 5th. And then we issued another red flag warning. I'm going to talk about this just real quickly here in a second. For Santa Barbara County, as the Thomas Fire spread into Santa Barbara County above Montecito, Thomas Fire was not fully contained until January 12th. And that was actually the January 9th Montecito debris flow. So the Thomas Fire was considered 100% contained after that. So just to give you an idea, we were hitting pretty hard this potential for a strong sundowner. And sundowner, if you're not familiar, that's kind of the sibling of the Santa Ana winds, but these are up in Santa Barbara County. And we were informed by the Santa Barbara County operations chief that they pre-positioned 300 engines prior to that onset. And typically 10 to 15 are pre-positioned for these strong sundowners. And 8 structures damaged or destroyed out of a total of 1,300 that were at risk. Now, just another fire, which from an acreage standpoint is very small fire that occurred, the holiday fire around just after July 4th of this year above the city of Goleta, which Goleta is just to the west of Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara South Coast. So these are sundowner winds. They can be accompanied by very rapid increases in temperature, Many times, city of Santa Barbara will experience 100-degree temperatures, temperature rises of 20 degrees over a matter of even 30 of minutes or even hours, and very dry conditions. So the fire agency response, there's a program, D-RISC. D-RISC is new. It was actually signed back in the end of June, and D-RISC allocates, this is from a fire weather coalition in California. The California Firefighters Association, for instance, is part of that coalition that recommended this funding go towards supporting pre-position of resources before the fire starts. So this was actually the first event that they could there was a $25 million appropriation that was approved at the end of June. And so what this does is that it says, we see these conditions that have a high probability of occurring. Let's get resources in place now before the fire starts. So the traditional mutual aid system doesn't get going until after the incident starts, and many times it takes many hours to actually get those resources there. Many times the fire has already done quite a bit of damage. So what this does is get resources there pre-positioned, and they actually had a strike team. Cal OES approved a strike team for this particular sundowner event, so there's been no fire yet, and they've had the resources in place. So one of the things we did is we actively informed the fire agencies of this potential situation that we were looking at for early July of this year. We had a webinar where we were able to talk to them. We had conference calls. We had special partner emails that we sent to them. We had a fire weather watch that we issued 72 hours in advance of when the fire weather conditions first started, 36-hour lead time on the red flag warning. And we gave direct decision support services to Santa Barbara County. And this is the kind of messaging that we want to get a sense of urgency. And one of our forecasters that talked to them, who was actually in Southern California at the time of the Painted Cave Fire in 1990, said these conditions are very similar to the Painted Cave Fire. And that started in almost the same location back in 1990, but that destroyed 427 homes, 5,000 acres in just 6 hours in the city of Goleta. So where this fire started, it could have been a potentially very catastrophic wildfire. And so as a result, Woody Enos, who is the operations division chief for Santa Barbara County Fire, told us really what the impacts were of having those resources there and preventing that holiday fire from really getting out of hand and creating quite a bit of damage. And just his quote that the fire weather services have come quite a ways, and the weather service in terms of the support for the fire agencies has come quite a ways. And this is really kind of a testament of that type of support.
We've been reporting out stories on the aftermath recent wildfires have had on Santa Cruz locals and California residents these past couple weeks. I spoke with John Tracy, a local community member volunteering up in Butte County. His Thanksgiving bringing closure to families affected by the deadliest and most devastating wildfire in California history. John is a member of Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team. My first question is, how did you get involved with Santa Cruz Search and Rescue?
It's something that's been in kind of a family tradition. My dad was search and rescue back in Colorado, and when I moved out here, it just felt like the right thing to do.
It's all volunteer-based, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So John is following in his father's footsteps as a search and rescue volunteer. But I wondered how he found the time to do other work if he's volunteering for a full week up in Butte County. How do you get other work done when you're up there?
No, I take time off. I use vacation time to go up and do this. Fortunately, it's a holiday week, so I only have to take a few days off.
How does the preparation go?
So we've had training on different things that kind of prepare us for this. But when we get up there, they'll give us specific training on looking through burned out structures, which is something I've never done before. And then the other part is just packing all we camp out, because there's obviously no hotels. So it's like you're going on a camping trip, so you pack for that. And it's like you're doing a search and rescue adventure, so you pack for that. And then we're also going to be working in really hazardous conditions, so you bring a lot of safety gear.
What are you expecting when you go up there?
There's only so much I can prepare for. There's a lot I don't know, and I'm just kind of waiting to see. I'm actually a little excited to see what it's like. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase that. I wouldn't be in this if I didn't find this kind of work interesting, and this is like an extreme example of it. But then I'm also expecting a lot of devastation. I'm sure it's going to hit me in ways I didn't expect, just, the amount of loss that's up there. It's one of those things, like when you first see a dead body, you don't know how you're going to react until you see a dead body. Or when you're in an emergency situation, you don't know how you're going to react. I think it's going to be kind of the same thing.
How do you mentally prepare yourself?
Well, part of it is I volunteer as an EMT, so a lot of that training will be useful. It prepares me for the whole, I've seen dead bodies. I've been in situations that were high stress like this. The rest of it, I think it's just an accumulation as you do work and you do encounter situations that are outside your norm. You kind of develop just a whole method of dealing with it. And then the sheriff's office also provides counseling. So anytime we encounter a dead body, or we have a search that ends very badly, they always offer counseling, sometimes group counseling. They always have individual counseling available for us.
With 2018 nearing an end and the fire season winding down, we wanted to wrap up these reports. So this just in from Outdoors followed up with John Tracy about his experiences in Butte County, serving in Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team. So last we talked, you were up in Butte County. Could you kind of share how that first day starts and what briefing you're going to get as you're about to go embark on the journey?
So the first morning, there's a series of briefings. They wanted to make sure that we had the radio frequencies, that we knew the safety aspects that we needed to consider. And they had an anthropologist there who would give a quick talk about kind of what we were looking for. And then we loaded into our vehicles and we drove up. The first morning it was really, really smoky. I remember watching the sun come up and it was this dark orange ball through all the smoke. The camp felt kind of isolated because everything around it was just, thick smoke. We were nowhere near the fires, but just like all of the Bay Area, like a lot of California, we were just deep in the smoke. And then as we were driving toward the campfire area, we began seeing burned out fields, burned out trees, stuff like that. And then as we pulled into Paradise itself, before then, we began seeing tree cutting operations. PG&E was all over the place with trucks, setting up new power poles, running cables. We passed a staging area for them. There must have been, I don't know, I would guess like 600-700 large trucks, probably 2,000 or 3,000 people involved for the PG&E effort. And then there's a smaller camp with maybe people of the cable network folks. And then as we got closer still, we had to start they had traffic control set up where the lanes stopped and traffic would stop while the tree fellers would fell these giant burned out trees. Another place where they were staging all those, mulching them up, mixing them with this stuff that they'd spray on the hillsides so that the hills wouldn't slide because they knew rain was coming. So there's all this other activity going on, all these signs of life before we even got anywhere near Paradise. And then as we got closer, we began seeing evidence of the destruction. We passed something that was still smoldering, and we realized that this was like a fence around a house, and there were fence posts way down on the ground, and one of those still had some heat in it. And we began seeing just the perimeters, the concrete perimeters, as I'm sure people who've seen pictures of this now know. It's just the fire burned unchecked. There was no defense for them. Everybody was just trying to get out. So the houses burned completely. There was nothing left. There'd be the perimeter. There'd be a washer and a dryer, which you could tell because there were these burned out, twisted pieces of metal that looked vaguely washer or dryer shaped. And there would be, if they had metal roof, there'd be this twisted metal debris all over the place, burned out cars. And then as we rolled into Paradise, we passed the mall, which is completely gutted. There was several gas stations that the gas station burned, but the gas pumps were fine. And it was odd to go through, and like every other building seemed to be damaged, not damaged, but gone. And then other buildings would be completely untouched. There was no damaged structures. There was things that had survived and things that were destroyed completely. And then we'd roll up to our, I guess you could call it a forward operating base, where we all got together. We'd don our safety gear, which included Tyvek suits. It's kind of like the packages that FedEx envelope kind of stuff. made to be disposable. We had heavy respirators, which had a pre-filter on the outside and then a carbon filter on the inside. And at the end of the day, our pre-filters were dark gray, and we had to change them out every day. And then we'd be briefed on exactly where we were going and any other last-minute safety concerns. And then we'd drive to the neighborhood where we spent, the whole time we were there, we basically spent in one neighborhood. And we just drove through just the ruins of what used to be a neighborhood and, hundreds of homes. And I think there was 4 or 5 homes standing. That was it. The only way I can describe it is if you went for a walk in your neighborhood and you look at all the houses in your neighborhood and all the cars and the fences and the landscaping and everything, and then focus on one house and keep that house in your mind, everything else is gone that you've seen. Just that one house survives.
Yeah, you're saying it's overwhelming, which definitely understandable. So you're driving through these places, and then are you stopping off with a partner and then you guys are split up? Or how do you divvy up the work? There's just so many sites that are ruined.
Good question. So we would go through in teams of 6 to 8 people, and the search and rescue response from Santa Cruz was 8 people went up, sheriff officers and volunteers. So we were able to be a team, and if another team was a little short, we would hand off one person to another team. But there was usually 6 to 8 people. So we pulled up into the neighborhood, we got out. One of the FEMA fire crew there, they have firefighters who were assigned to the different teams to make sure that things were safe. So we would start with them going into the property with what's called a hot stick. And the hot stick looks for unshielded AC current. And it's to make sure that there's no live lines, no power. And so he would take the hot stick and go around the entire property. And he would also look for things like trees that looked like they were about to fall, unvented propane tanks, which we didn't find any of. All the propane tanks were completely empty. And in one case, a septic tank that the top had burned out of. When we were up there, one of the excavators helping us kind of backed into one buried septic tank. They're impossible to see. And there were reports of a couple people falling into them. So that was probably the most dangerous thing.
What other kind of unexpected things can happen like that?
Well, the trees were a big one. They showed us how to recognize trees that were burned out. There would be a hole in the ground under it where the roots had burned. There would be a hollow in the side where you could see that the tree the inside of the tree no longer existed because it burned out. Walking up to one property, there were these tiny metal fragments all over the place that had burned into the pavement. And it was from one of the transformers had blown, the electrical transformers, and it shattered this metal all over the place. It wasn't a hazard for us, but you could see the hazards that must have existed for the people trying to leave. I mean, there's just hazards everywhere. For us, it was more safety about the environment we're in. It's full of whatever houses are full of when they totally have burned to nothing. So we wore the respirators, we wore goggles, we wore safety helmets, we wore IVEX suits, we had heavy work gloves, heavy work boots. In fact, at the end of this, I had to throw my boots away because they were so torn up. We were walking on broken metal, broken glass, nails. Those are the things that would survive. So our gloves and our boots would get really cut up.
When you enter this zone that people aren't even allowed to be entering, can you talk about that kind of shock?
Yeah, it was we're very much focused on what we were looking for, which was, human remains, any signs that life was there during the time of the fire. So we were very focused on that task, but it was still very impactful. I mean, of course it is. The biggest impact to me wasn't the difference between the life that we saw, the activity, and the quietness, because we were still, even though we were in a team of 8, there was maybe 5 or 6 teams right around us working, so we still felt like there's a lot of things going on here. But every once in a while, you'd be digging through the ashes, and we'd use either rakes or shovels to comb through the ashes, and you'd find something that was recognizable, like a plate, or something that indicated that this is someone's house. And you'd find a whole plate or something like that, and you'd carefully set it up on the foundation edge because you want to make sure that one artifact survived. So when the person came back to their house, at least it wasn't a total loss. I know it sounds silly, but it was really important to me. Another impact we saw was the deer. So we were having lunch one day, and there were these deer wandering around nearby, like 5 deer, and one of our teammates threw an apple toward the deer. The deer kind of rushed the apple. So we took all of our organic, like apples and carrots we had for the lunch and all that, and we left that for the deer, and they really appreciated it. But there was no vegetation left for them to eat up in that area because it had all the ground stuff had burned and all the tree material up to about 15, 20 feet was gone.
In comparison to other search and rescue missions that you've been on, how is this one different?
This is the first time I've ever gone where the objective is to find whatever you can find. We don't know if there's anybody in here. The first few sites were really hard to leave because to really find somebody, if there was somebody in that house, you'd have to go through with a sifter and spend days at each house. But since there's 14,000 houses, you can't really do that. There just isn't the people power available to go through all of that. So we had to prioritize them. There's 3 different priority levels we'd get. Priority 1 would be we'd received a credible tip that there's somebody in that house or something that indicated that, yeah, there's probably somebody in there. So those we would spend a lot of extra time and go through them in as fine detail as possible. Priority 2 were ones where there's a car in the driveway or a car in the garage on the same side that the person would get out and walk into the house. So something to say that that's the primary vehicle. We would do those a little more thoroughly. And then priority 3 would be there's no indication that there would be somebody still there. So those we would go in, look for the mattress, which you could see where the mattress was because the box springs don't burn. There's still all of these springs around in a mattress shape. So we'd look for the box springs, we'd look for the bathroom, for the tub, and we'd look for any recliners. And we would search those really well and then give a cursory search of the rest of them. Try not to spend more than 15 minutes on that house.
How did it kind of change you?
Well, there's a few things I took away from it. One is there's no such thing as a fireproof house. Some of the houses we dug through were metal roofed and stucco siding houses that, the outside doesn't burn, but the inside combusts. So one of the takeaways was everything burns. And if left unchecked, it burns very thoroughly. Another was the hope that was still there. I mean, PG&E was running wires because they were expecting Paradise to come back. So they were running power there. So they were ready. They're running it to the water treatment plant so that water service could be reestablished. So there was already things happening to make sure that infrastructure would be there. Even though there's so much destruction, I think that there will be a rebuilding of Paradise. I really do think it will come back. It's hard to put into words. The week or so after I got back, kind of obsessed over it. Every single news story I could find that had the count of missing and the count of dead, I followed that very closely. And then I was also looking at drone footage that was put up, where some people flew drones over showing the current neighborhoods and, the destruction. And then I was comparing that to the Google Street View and the Google Overview, because I kind of wanted to see, what was there before? And there was one house that we went to. Actually, there were several houses, but one I remember in particular that had a for sale sign out front, and it had little flyers that showed the pictures of the house, the inside and the exterior and interior, and just comparing that to the ash and the rubble. I don't know, it really brought home that, this is a house. This is what it was. And someone had put a lot of care into it. It was like a craftsman-style house. Now, unfortunately, it's gone.
Do you find yourself wanting to tell our listeners anything in particular after experiencing this and going up there?
I'm really honored to have been part of it. I got to go into homes and, it's kind of, you're going in a very intimate way. You're digging through all of their possessions, what's left of the ashes of their home. They haven't even got to go in here yet. So I tried to be really respectful of that when I was there and very cognizant of the fact that I was in somebody's house, even though there's basically nothing left. And that anything I found that was still intact, I felt like I had this duty to reverence almost, be very respectful of everything that was there. And I'm very thankful that I got to do it. A lot of people, thank me for doing it. And I'm like, I feel very honored to have been able to go up and experience this and to go up and try to help.
Thanks for tuning into This Just In From Outdoors. Check out our stories and past shows online at newsfromoutdoors.bandcamp.com. I've been your host, Keith Rosendahl, from Washington, D.C. Our headlines were produced by Suzanne Potter of the California News Service, Bob Hirschhorn of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Dr. Anthony Leiserowitz, the director of the Yale Center for Environmental Communications. The piece on recovery after the Camp Wildfire was produced by Katie Brown. The talk by Mark Jackson was recorded and edited by Keith Rosendahl at the AGU Fall Meeting in Washington, D.C. Thanks again for listening. We'll be here next Thursday at 5 p.m. for another edition. Until then, we'll see you outdoors.
Please stay tuned for the Pacifica Evening News, which airs on KZSC Santa Cruz every night at 6 p.m.
Just bees and things and flowers. Just bees and things and flowers. Sunshine.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? This forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
This just in from Outdoors.